A bleeding Marine just threw a metal tray across the emergency room and nearly knocked out a nurse. Nobody moved. Not the doctors, not the security guard, not even the paramedics who had just dragged him through the doors. The man on the trauma bed was covered in blood and yelling at people who weren't there. "Get down! Get down!" His fist slammed against the rail of the hospital bed so hard the entire frame rattled. Monitors beeped wildly. Someone in the back whispered, "Jesus, what happened to him?" The paramedic who came in with the stretcher looked exhausted and said, "Marine Raider. Training accident at Pendleton. Gunshot wounds and possible blast concussion. He's been like this since we picked him up." Another nurse tried to approach with gauze. The Marine swung his arm so fast she barely jumped back in time. A tray of instruments clattered to the floor. The trauma room froze. Doctor. Stephen Ward stood near the foot of the bed with his arms crossed, watching the situation spiral. "Don't get close yet," he said calmly. "He's not oriented." That was the polite hospital way of saying the patient might punch someone. The Marine was a big guy, maybe 6'2", built like someone who had spent the last decade carrying heavy gear across bad places. His camouflage pants were soaked in blood. One leg was wrapped with a field tourniquet that had been tightened hard enough to cut off circulation. There were 2 gunshot wounds in his torso, one near the shoulder, another lower in the ribs. And judging by the way he kept squinting and shaking his head, the paramedic was probably right about the blast concussion. He wasn't seeing the emergency room. He was somewhere else. "Contact left," the Marine yelled. He grabbed the IV line and ripped it straight out of his arm. Blood splattered across the sheet. A nurse cursed under her breath. "Security's on the way," someone said from the hallway. The paramedic wiped sweat from his forehead. "We had to stop twice on the way here. He kept trying to climb off the stretcher." Dr. Ward sighed. "Great." Another nurse tried to calm the Marine. "Sir, you're in a hospital." The Marine shoved her hand away so hard she stumbled back into the supply cart. "Move." The entire trauma team backed up a step. It's not that doctors and nurses are afraid of patients. Emergency rooms see plenty of chaos. But this guy was strong, confused, and bleeding. A bad combination. If they restrained him wrong, they could make his injuries worse. If they didn't restrain him, someone might get hurt. Ward rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Where's security?" "They're coming." The Marine tried to sit up again. The heart monitor screamed. His blood pressure was dropping fast. Ward muttered, "He's going to bleed out before we even get a line in." No one answered, because nobody wanted to be the next person standing within punching distance. Then someone quietly stepped forward. She had been standing near the back of the room the whole time. Scrubs, blue gloves, dark hair tied in a tight ponytail. Her name badge read Lena Cross. She didn't look dramatic. She didn't look heroic. She looked like someone who had been working the night shift for too many years. "Lena, don't," another nurse whispered. The Marine slammed his hand against the bed rail again. "Where's my team?" Lena walked forward anyway. Slow, calm, the way someone walks toward a nervous dog that might bite. Dr. Ward turned his head. Cross-step back. She didn't. She stopped 2 feet from the bed. The Marine turned toward her. His eyes were wild. He looked like he might swing again. The room held its breath. Lena spoke in a calm, flat voice. "Stand down, Atlas." The effect was instant. The Marine froze. His chest heaved. His eyes focused for the first time since he came through the doors. Silence filled the trauma room. The Marine stared at her like he had just seen a ghost. Then his shoulders dropped. His voice came out hoarse. Echo. Nobody else in the room understood what had just happened. But the man who had been seconds away from attacking half the ER suddenly stopped fighting. Dr. Ward blinked. "What the hell?" Lena didn't answer. She stepped closer to the bed. "Easy," she said quietly. The Marine was breathing hard, but he didn't swing. He didn't fight. He just looked at her, like someone who had suddenly remembered where he was. Lena turned slightly toward the trauma team. "Let's move before he crashes." That snapped everyone back into motion. The paramedic grabbed fresh gauze. Another nurse started prepping blood. Ward stepped forward again, still watching Lena carefully. "All right," he said. "Let's see if we can keep him alive." As the team moved around the bed, Lena leaned closer to the Marine. "Daniel," she said quietly. His eyes flickered. "You're at Redwood Valley Regional." He swallowed. "Hospital, yeah." He nodded weakly. Then he looked at her again. "You were recon." Lena didn't answer that. Instead, she pressed gauze against the wound in his side. "Save your strength." Across the room, Dr. Ward folded his arms again. He watched the Marine calm down. He watched Lena work. And one question kept circling in his head. How did a civilian ER nurse know a Marine Raider's call sign? If that moment made you curious, drop a comment and tell us what you think really happened between them. And if you enjoy intense hospital stories like this, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The trauma room came back to life around the bed. Blood bags, IV lines, surgical trays. Someone called radiology. Another nurse checked the tourniquet. Ward stepped closer to examine the gunshot wounds. The Marine's breathing was slowing now. But something about the way he kept squinting bothered Lena. She noticed it again when he turned his head. Just for a second. His left eye reacted slower than the right. Most people in the room would miss something that small. But Lena didn't. She had seen that look before, and every time she had seen it, someone's condition got worse fast. Lena kept watching his eyes as the monitor continued to beep beside the bed. The difference was small. Most people in the trauma room wouldn't notice it, but once you saw it, you couldn't ignore it. Daniel Mercer's left pupil reacted slower than the right, just a fraction of a second. The Marine blinked hard and winced. "Head hurts," he muttered. Dr. Ward stepped closer and lifted the gauze covering the gunshot wound near Mercer's ribs. "Yeah, I imagine a lot of things hurt right now," Ward said. He checked the bleeding again. The pressure dressing was already soaked red. "Let's get 2 units of O-negative ready," Ward said without looking up. "Already coming," a nurse answered from across the room. Mercer tried to turn his head. The movement made him groan. Lena steadied his shoulder. "Easy," she said quietly. Mercer focused on her face again. "You're still here." "Yeah," Lena said. His voice sounded rough. "Didn't think I'd see you again." Lena didn't answer. Instead, she pressed fresh gauze against the wound on his side. Across the bed, Ward glanced at her. "You two know each other," Mercer laughed weakly. "Know her?" he coughed. "That woman dragged me across a dirt road in Afghanistan while bullets were hitting the truck next to us." The trauma room went quiet for half a second. Ward raised one eyebrow. Lena didn't look up. "Daniel," she said calmly, "save your breath?" But Mercer kept staring at her. "You were with Recon." "Not now," Lena said. The nurse at the IV stand whispered to another staff member. Recon Ward crossed his arms again. "You were in the military." "Used to be," Lena said. Ward looked between the two of them. Then he turned back to Mercer. "All right, Marine," he said. "Let's focus on keeping you alive first." Mercer nodded slightly. "Sounds good, Doc." The blood bag arrived. A nurse hung it on the stand and opened the line. Ward pointed toward the monitor. Pressure's dropping again. The paramedic who had brought Mercer in was still standing near the door. He cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, Doc, the guy refused treatment on the range." Ward looked up. "Refused?" The paramedic shrugged. "He was walking around after the explosion. Said he was fine." Mercer closed his eyes. "Wasn't that bad," he muttered. The paramedic shook his head. "Buddy, you collapsed at a gas station 5 miles from base." Mercer opened one eye. "Still drove there." Ward gave a short laugh. "Yeah, that's not the part that impresses me." He checked the tourniquet again. "Who put this on?" "Range medic," the paramedic said. "Good work," Ward said. The bleeding from Mercer's leg had slowed to a dark seep. Ward turned to Lena. "You said Atlas earlier?" "Yeah, that his nickname." Mercer answered before she could. "Call sign." Ward nodded slowly. "Right." He studied Lena for a moment. "You just happened to remember that from Afghanistan, Lena kept her focus on the wound she was packing. I remember a lot of things." Mercer chuckled weakly again. "You always did." Ward straightened up. "All right," he said. "Let's get a CT scan and make sure nothing else is going on." Mercer groaned. "Do I have a choice?" "No?" "Figures." The team began preparing the stretcher for transport. Another nurse clipped a portable monitor to the bed. Mercer suddenly squinted again. The lights above him seemed to bother his eyes. Lena noticed it immediately. "Daniel," she said quietly. He turned his head toward her. "You feeling dizzy?" "A little." "Vision okay, blurry?" Ward overheard the exchange. "That's probably the blood loss," he said. Mercer nodded slowly. "Feels like a hangover." The paramedic snorted. "You wish." Mercer tried to smile but winced again. "Worth a shot." The stretcher wheels locked into place. 2 orderlies moved to push the bed toward radiology. But before they rolled him out, Mercer grabbed Lena's wrist. His grip wasn't strong, but it was firm enough to stop her. "Echo." She looked down at him. "You remember Tate?" he asked quietly. The name landed in the room like a small weight. Lena didn't answer right away. "Yes," she said finally. Mercer swallowed. "He was on the range today." The words hit harder than anything else he had said. Ward looked up. "Was." Mercer stared at the ceiling. "He didn't make it." No one spoke for a moment. The paramedic shifted uncomfortably near the wall. Ward finally broke the silence. "What exactly happened out there?" Mercer shut his eyes again. training charge went off wrong. The Marine's breathing slowed as the blood transfusions started working. Everything got loud. He opened one eye again and looked toward Lena. "You would have hated it." Lena held his gaze. "Probably." The bed started rolling toward the hallway. Monitors clicked and wheels squeaked against the floor. Ward walked alongside the stretcher. "So let me get this straight," he said. "Live fire exercise. Explosion. 1 Marine dead. And this guy drives himself off base with 2 gunshot wounds." The paramedic nodded. "Pretty much." Ward shook his head. "Marines?" They reached the radiology doors. The technician inside waved them in. "Bring him over." Mercer groaned as the bed moved under the scanner. The machine hummed to life. Lena stood near the control window watching the screen. Ward leaned beside her. "You seem pretty calm for someone who just ran toward a violent patient." Lena shrugged. "I've seen worse." Ward studied the CT images as they appeared. "So have I," he said. The technician zoomed in on Mercer's skull. The image flickered slightly. Ward frowned. "Looks clean," the technician said. "Probably just concussion." Ward nodded. "That's what it looks like." But Lena didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the monitor. That small shadow near the edge of the scan looked familiar. Too familiar. Ward noticed her expression. "You see something?" Lena didn't answer right away. She leaned a little closer to the screen. The shadow was barely visible, but it was there, and she had seen something like it before. Too many times. Lena leaned closer to the CT screen, her eyes narrowing at the faint shadow along the edge of Mercer's scan. It was small, easy to ignore. The radiology tech had already moved on to the next set of images. "Looks clean to me," he said. Dr. Ward folded his arms. "Same here." Lena didn't respond. The scan rotated slowly on the monitor. That shadow didn't look like noise. It looked like something pressing where nothing should be pressing. Ward noticed she hadn't moved. "You see something?" Lena kept her voice even. "Maybe." The tech turned his chair. "Artifact," he said. "Happens all the time." Ward nodded. "Especially when a patient moves." Mercer had definitely moved. He had tried to sit up twice inside the scanner. The tech closed the file and leaned back. "If that's it, we're done." Ward tapped the counter. "All right. Let's get him back to trauma," and Lena spoke quietly. "Run it again." Both men looked at her. The tech frowned. "Again, just the head," Lena said. Ward gave her a look. "You really think there's something there?" Lena didn't answer right away. She just kept watching the frozen image. The tech sighed. Doc Ward studied the screen one more time. He shrugged. "Fine. One more pass." The stretcher rolled back into position. Mercer groaned as they adjusted his head. "You guys done playing with the giant donut machine," almost Ward said. Mercer squinted at the ceiling. "My head feels like someone parked a truck on it." "That's not unusual tonight," Ward said. The machine hummed again. Images started forming on the monitor. Slice by slice. The room stayed quiet. Lena watched every frame. Ward leaned on the counter beside her. "You always this stubborn, sometimes." Mercer's voice came through the speaker inside the scanner. "Doc." Ward pressed the intercom button. "Yeah." Did Salgado make it? Ward looked at the paramedic who had followed them down the hall. The man shook his head slightly. Ward spoke into the mic. Who's Salgado Gunny? Ward glanced at the paramedic again. Your gunnery sergeant, yeah. He's fine, Ward said. Mercer exhaled slowly. Good. The scan finished. The tech pulled the images up. This time the shadow showed up clearer. Still small, but clearer. Ward leaned forward. Wait. The tech zoomed in. Still looks like artifact. Ward wasn't so sure now. Zoom again. The image expanded. The faint dark crescent near the skull became more visible. Ward's face tightened. Huh. Lena didn't say anything. The tech scratched his head. That wasn't there earlier. It was, Lena said. The tech looked at her. You sure? Yeah. Ward stared at the screen for another few seconds. All right, he said quietly. That's not artifact. The tech leaned closer. Subdural Ward nodded slowly. Looks like it. The tech whistled under his breath. Good catch. Ward didn't answer. He kept studying the image. The bleed was small, but the shape told the story. It had started spreading. Ward stepped away from the counter. Call neurosurgery. The tech nodded and picked up the phone. Mercer was already being rolled back toward the trauma room. His voice drifted down the hallway. You guys figure out why my head feels like it's exploding yet? Ward walked beside the stretcher. Working on it. Mercer opened one eye. You don't sound confident. Ward smirked. That's because I'm a doctor, Mercer gave a weak laugh. Fair. They reached the trauma bay again. The room looked calmer now. Blood bags hung from the IV stand. The monitor showed Mercer's pressure creeping back up. But Lena was watching his eyes again. The left one still lagged behind. Ward noticed. You called that bleed before the scan finished. Lena shrugged. I've seen it before. We're not in hospitals. Ward studied her face. How long were you in the Navy? 7 years. Corpsman, yeah. Ward nodded slowly. Explains the calm. Mercer shifted on the bed. Echo wasn't just calm. Ward looked at him. Oh, yeah. Mercer managed a faint grin. She once stitched a guy's leg while we were taking fire. Ward blinked. You're kidding. Nope. Lena pressed fresh gauze against Mercer's ribs. You talk too much when you're injured. Mercer looked at her. Still true. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. A tall Marine in desert utilities stepped into the trauma room. His sleeves were rolled and his expression was tight. Staff Sergeant Mercer Ward turned. You are Gunnery Sergeant Victor Salgado. Mercer tried to sit up. Gunny. Salgado moved closer to the bed. You look like hell. Mercer grinned weakly. Good to see you, too. Ward crossed his arms. You were with him during the accident. Salgado nodded. Yes, sir. Ward gestured toward the CT images now on the screen. He's got a brain bleed. Salgado's jaw tightened. From the blast. Most likely. Mercer closed his eyes. Told you it wasn't that bad. Ward shook his head. You Marines have a weird definition of not that bad. Salgado looked toward Lena. You the one who caught it? Lena nodded once. Salgado studied her for a second. Then recognition hit. Cross? Lena met his eyes. Yeah. Salgado shook his head slowly. I thought you got out. I did. Mercer chuckled weakly. Looks like she's still saving our asses. Ward glanced between them. So all of you know each other. Salgado nodded. Recon unit. Afghanistan Ward let out a long breath. That explains a lot. The neurosurgery pager buzzed at the nurse station. Ward checked the message. They're on their way. Mercer looked toward Lena again. You remember Tate? The name hung in the air. Salgado's expression hardened. Mercer. But Mercer kept talking. He was next to me when the charge blew. Lena's hand paused for half a second against the dressing. Ward noticed. Charge Salgado looked toward him. Training explosive. Ward frowned. That's what caused the blast. Salgado nodded. Yes, sir. Mercer stared at the ceiling. Tate never had a chance. No one in the room said anything for a moment. The monitor continued its steady beeping. Ward looked back at the CT screen, then at Lena. You said you'd seen this before. She nodded. Ward's voice lowered slightly. How many times Lena answered without looking up. Enough to know when it's about to get worse. Lena kept her eyes on Mercer's pupils as the monitor beside the bed ticked out a steady rhythm. The left one lagged again. Just slightly, but it was still there. Dr. Ward followed her gaze. You think it's getting worse? Could be, Lena said. Mercer squinted at the overhead lights. Can someone turn those down? He muttered. A nurse dimmed the surgical lamp. Mercer exhaled slowly. Thanks. Ward pulled the CT images back onto the trauma room monitor. The faint crescent along Mercer's skull was easier to see now. Still small, but definitely there. Ward pointed at the screen. Subdural bleed, he said. Salgado stepped closer. That's serious. It can be. Ward replied. Mercer looked toward the screen. Show me. Ward hesitated. You sure? Mercer nodded. Seen worse. Ward tilted the monitor slightly so Mercer could see it from the bed. That dark line along the skull, Ward said. That's blood. Mercer stared at the image for a moment. Then he nodded once. Figures. Ward glanced at him. You don't seem surprised. Mercer shrugged weakly. Blast wave hit the Humvee door pretty hard. Ward looked at Salgado. You said training charge malfunction. Yes, sir. How big? 2-pound demo charge. Ward whistled softly. That'll do it. Mercer shifted on the bed again. The movement made him grimace. Felt like someone kicked my skull with a boot. Ward checked the monitor again. Heart rate was climbing slightly. Pressure was holding for now. But the bleed on the scan told a different story. Lena noticed Mercer's breathing getting uneven. Daniel? He turned his head slightly. You getting more pressure behind your eyes. He paused. Yeah. How bad? Mercer thought about it, like my brain's trying to push its way out. Ward didn't like that answer. He stepped toward the nurse station. Where's neurosurgery? A voice from the desk replied. Dr. Pike just parked. He's coming up. Ward nodded. Good. Mercer suddenly winced again. His hand moved toward his temple. Lena gently pushed it back down. Don't rub your head. Feels like it's splitting open, Mercer said. Ward glanced at the monitor again. The heart rate had jumped 10 points. He leaned toward Mercer. Stay with us. Mercer snorted softly. I'm not going anywhere. Salgado stepped closer to the bed. You always say that. Mercer smirked faintly. Still here. Salgado folded his arms. You also said you were fine after the explosion. Mercer didn't answer. Ward looked toward Salgado. What exactly happened out there? Salgado sighed. Live fire training on the South Range. Ward nodded. Then what? One of the demo charges detonated early. Ward frowned. Early how? Salgado shook his head. Still figuring that out. Mercer opened one eye. It wasn't supposed to go off yet. Salgado glanced at him. Mercer. Mercer ignored the warning. Tate was setting the line. Lena's hands slowed slightly as she adjusted the dressing on his ribs. Ward noticed. What line? Breaching charge, Mercer said. Ward nodded. And the explosion, Mercer stared at the ceiling. Knocked everyone flat. Salgado's jaw tightened. Tate took the worst of it. Ward looked back at the scan again. And Mercer got hit by debris. Salgado nodded. And the ricochet round. Ward blinked. Ricochet Mercer lifted his hand slightly. Range instructor fired a safety shot after the blast. Ward stared at him. That hit you? Mercer shrugged weakly. Guess so. Ward shook his head slowly. You Marines have the worst luck, Mercer smiled faintly. Usually. Lena checked Mercer's pupils again. The difference was bigger now. Not much, but enough. She leaned closer. Daniel. Yeah. You feel sleepy? He thought for a moment. Little bit. Ward heard that and immediately turned. No sleeping. Mercer rolled his eyes. Doc, seriously. Ward snapped his fingers once near Mercer's face. Stay awake. Mercer blinked. I'm awake. Ward looked toward the hallway. Where the hell is Pike? As if on cue, a tall man in surgical scrubs stepped through the trauma doors. Someone say my name. Dr. Jonathan Pike looked like a man who had just been pulled out of a late dinner. Ward pointed toward the screen. Subdural bleed. Pike walked over. How big? Ward zoomed in on the scan. Small but spreading. Pike leaned closer. He studied the image silently for a few seconds. Then he nodded. Yeah. Ward crossed his arms. You thinking surgery? Pike looked at Mercer. Symptoms, Lena answered. Head pressure, unequal pupils, worsening headache. Pike looked back at the scan. Then at Mercer. How you feeling? Marine Mercer squinted at him. Like someone hit my head with a shovel. Pike nodded. Sounds about right. Ward gestured toward the monitor. You think we have time? Pike didn't answer right away. He walked closer to the bed and shined a small pen light into Mercer's eyes. Left pupil, then right. He frowned slightly. Yeah. Ward noticed the expression. That bad? Pike lowered the pen light. Worse than I'd like. Mercer watched the two doctors quietly. All right, he said. Which part of me are you about to cut open? Pike gave a small smile. Hopefully, just the part causing trouble. Ward looked back at the scan again. That bleed wasn't obvious. Pike glanced toward Lena. Who caught it? Ward nodded toward her. She did. Pike studied Lena for a moment. Then he nodded once. Good eye. Mercer chuckled weakly. Yeah. He looked toward Lena again. Told you she was the best medic we had. Ward raised an eyebrow. Medic Mercer grinned faintly. Long story. Pike stepped back from the bed. We don't have long to debate it. Ward nodded. You're taking him upstairs. Pike's eyes moved once more from the scan to Mercer's face. Then he spoke calmly. Yeah. And the way he said it made everyone in the room understand something important. The bleed was moving faster than they wanted. Lena saw the change in Mercer's face before the monitors reacted. It wasn't dramatic, just a tightness around his eyes. The kind that shows up when pressure starts building where it shouldn't. Dr. Pike turned to the trauma team. We're taking him to surgery. The room moved instantly. Someone began prepping transport paperwork. Another nurse swapped the IV line for a faster pump. Dr. Ward leaned toward the monitor again. Vitals. A nurse read them out. Pressure 98/62. Heart rate 120. Ward nodded. Still holding. Mercer listened to the conversation like someone hearing people argue about a car repair. So you're cutting my head open. Pike answered calmly. That's the plan. Mercer gave a tired half smile. Been worse. Ward looked at him. You say that a lot. Mercer shrugged. Usually true. Lena checked the dressing on his ribs again. The bleeding there had slowed but hadn't stopped completely. She adjusted the gauze. Don't move. I'm trying not to, Mercer said. Salgado stood near the foot of the bed with his arms crossed. His expression had gone from tight to grim. Ward glanced at him. You staying? Yes, sir. Ward nodded once. Fair enough. Mercer looked toward Salgado. Gunny. Yeah. You tell command about Tate. Salgado hesitated. Not yet. Mercer nodded slowly. Good. Ward raised an eyebrow. That's something we should know about. Salgado shook his head. Range investigation will handle it. Ward didn't press further. Right now, the medical situation mattered more. The transport team rolled a surgical gurney into the room. Metal wheels squeaked against the floor. Pike checked the CT images one more time. The bleed still looked small, but the symptoms told a different story. Subdural expansion, Pike said quietly. Ward nodded. Pressure building faster than expected. Mercer rubbed his temple again. Feels like it. Lena gently moved his hand away. Don't press there. Mercer looked at her. You always bossy like this, only when you're bleeding. Mercer chuckled weakly. Good reason. Ward stepped closer to the bed. Marine. Mercer turned his head. Yeah, Doc. Stay awake while we move you. Mercer sighed. That again. Yes. Mercer nodded. All right. The nurses unlocked the bed rails and began sliding Mercer onto the surgical gurney. The movement made him groan. Careful, he muttered. One of the orderlies answered. Trying. Once he was secured, Pike checked the IV lines. 2 blood bags were already flowing. Good. Ward looked toward Lena. You coming up? Lena hesitated for a fraction of a second. Ward noticed. You were the one who caught the bleed. I know. Then you should be there. Mercer lifted his head slightly. Yeah, Echo. Lena sighed quietly. Don't call me that. Mercer grinned faintly. Too late. The gurney began rolling toward the hallway. Fluorescent lights passed overhead in a steady rhythm. Mercer stared up at them. Feels like a bad road trip. Ward walked beside the gurney. You should try ambulance rides sometime. Hard pass. They reached the elevator. The doors slid open. Inside, the space felt smaller with 6 people and a stretcher. The elevator hummed as it began climbing toward the surgical floor. Mercer blinked slowly. Doc. Ward looked down. Yeah, if I pass out. You won't. Mercer smiled faintly. You say that like you're sure. Ward shrugged. I like confidence. The elevator doors opened. The surgical corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic and floor cleaner. Pike stepped ahead. Or 3. The team pushed the gurney through double doors. Inside the operating room, bright surgical lights were already warming up. The anesthesiologist looked up from the equipment. This our guy? Pike nodded. Subdural bleed. Blast trauma. The anesthesiologist stepped closer. Marine Mercer nodded slightly. Unfortunately, the man smiled. My brother's a Marine, Mercer smirked. Sorry to hear that. A few quiet laughs broke the tension. Lena helped move Mercer from the gurney to the operating table. The surgical staff began working quickly. Electrodes, lines, monitoring equipment. Ward stood near the foot of the table, watching the organized chaos. He turned toward Lena. How many times did you deal with this overseas? Too many. Ward nodded slowly. Figures. Mercer's voice cut through the room again. Echo. Lena looked down. Yeah. You remember that night near Coast? Lena paused. Ward noticed the change in her expression. Yes. Mercer's eyes were getting heavy now. You told me something back then. What Mercer managed a faint smile. You said Marines are hard to kill. Lena tightened the strap around his arm for the blood pressure cuff. Still true. The anesthesiologist began preparing the sedative. Ward leaned toward Pike. How fast do you want him under soon? Ward nodded. Mercer's eyelids drooped again. Hey, Ward said sharply. Mercer blinked. Still here? Ward glanced at the monitor. Heart rate 130. Pressure climbing slightly. The body reacting to the stress. Pike scrubbed his hands at the surgical sink. Water ran over the steel basin. The sound filled the room. Lena stood beside the operating table, watching Mercer breathe. Something about the rhythm still felt wrong. Not just the bleed. Something deeper. She couldn't explain it yet. But the feeling wouldn't leave. Behind her, Ward checked the scan again on the OR monitor. The dark crescent along Mercer's skull looked slightly thicker than before. Ward leaned closer. Pike? The surgeon turned from the sink. Yeah. Ward pointed at the screen. You might want to see this. Pike stepped over. He stared at the image for several seconds. Then his jaw tightened just slightly. All right, he said calmly. Let's not waste any more time. Lena tightened the strap on Mercer's arm as the anesthesiologist prepared the sedative beside her. The room had shifted. Everything was faster now, more focused. The kind of quiet that only shows up when everyone knows exactly how serious things just became. Mercer's breathing slowed as the medication started to take hold. He looked at Lena again. Echo. She didn't correct him this time. Yeah. His voice was fading. You ever think about that night Lena didn't answer right away? The monitor beeped steadily beside them. She checked his IV line. Stay with us. Mercer gave a weak smile. That's not what I asked. The anesthesiologist glanced at Lena. 10 seconds. Lena nodded. Mercer blinked slowly. Afghanistan, he said quietly. The word hung there. Lena's hands didn't stop moving, but something behind her eyes shifted. Yeah, she said. Mercer's voice softened. Thought we were done that day. The surgical team moved around them, prepping instruments, adjusting lights, confirming positions. But for a second, Lena wasn't fully in that room anymore. Dust, heat, the sharp smell of burned metal. The memory hit fast the way those things always did. She could still see it. A narrow dirt road outside Coast. A convoy stopped too long in the wrong place. The blast came without warning. 1 second, everything was routine. The next second, the world tore open. Mercer's voice pulled her back. You remember Tate? Lena didn't hesitate. Yes. The answer came out flat, because there was no other way to say it. Mercer swallowed. He was right behind me. Lena adjusted the line again. Her hands stayed steady, even if her mind didn't. I know the anesthesiologist looked over. 3 seconds. Mercer's eyelids dropped halfway. He didn't even get a chance, Mercer said. The words came slower now, like they had to fight their way out. Lena glanced at the monitor. Vitals still holding. For now. None of us do, she said quietly. Mercer exhaled. You told me that too. Lena didn't remember saying it, but it sounded like something she would have said. Back then, she had said whatever kept people moving, whatever kept them alive for 1 more minute. The anesthesiologist nodded. He's going under. Mercer's eyes drifted shut, but his voice came 1 more time. Did I freeze? The question hung there. It didn't belong in an operating room. It belonged somewhere else, somewhere hotter, louder, more dangerous. Lena looked down at him. No, she said. You didn't. Mercer's breathing deepened as the sedation took over. The monitor shifted into a slower, steadier rhythm. He was under. The surgical team moved immediately. Pike stepped up to the table. Let's go. Lena stepped back to give space, but her eyes stayed on Mercer, even as the drapes went up, even as the surgical lights brightened. Ward stood near the side of the room watching everything. He glanced at Lena. You all right? She nodded once. Yeah. Ward didn't push. He had seen that look before. People who had worked in places like that didn't always talk about it. They just carried it. Pike adjusted his gloves. Scalpel. The instrument was placed into his hand. The room fell into that surgical rhythm again. Precise, measured, controlled. Lena moved to the side of the room, monitoring the IV lines. Her hands were busy, but her mind was still somewhere else. That road. That explosion. She remembered how fast everything had gone wrong. 6 Marines down. All at once. No time to think. Just act. She had triaged them in less than 30 seconds. 2 immediate, 2 delayed. 2. She stopped the thought, because that part didn't help anyone. Ward's voice cut in. Pressure's stable. Pike nodded. Good. The incision was clean. Controlled. Everything exactly how it should be. But Lena knew how fast that could change. She had seen surgeries go perfectly right up until the moment they didn't. She adjusted the flow on the IV line. Her eyes flicked back to Mercer. Still stable. Still holding. Ward stepped closer to her. You said you were with Recon. Yeah. How long? Long enough. Ward nodded. That explains why he listened to you. Lena didn't respond. Ward leaned against the wall. You called him Atlas. Call sign. Ward gave a small nod. And he called you Echo. Lena didn't correct him. Ward watched Pike work for a moment. You ever think about going back? Lena shook her head. No. Ward raised an eyebrow. Not even for a second. She looked at Mercer on the table, then back at the IV monitor. No. Ward didn't argue. He could tell the answer wasn't simple. Nothing about this night was. Across the room, Pike worked steadily. Retractor? Got it. Suction. The surgical rhythm continued. Lena checked the monitor again. Heart rate steady, pressure stable, but something still didn't sit right. That feeling from earlier hadn't gone away. Not even a little. She looked at the OR screen again. The scan was still up. That dark crescent. It had been small. Too small for what Mercer was feeling. Lena stepped closer. Ward noticed. What is it? She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stayed on the image. Then she spoke quietly. It shouldn't be this bad yet. Ward frowned. What do you mean? Lena pointed at the screen. That bleed is small. Ward nodded. Yeah. She looked back at Mercer, then at Pike. His symptoms are worse than that. Ward's expression shifted. He stepped closer to the monitor. Are you thinking something else is going on? Lena didn't look away from the screen. I think we're not seeing everything. Lena kept her eyes on the monitor as Pike adjusted his position over Mercer's skull. Something didn't match. The scan showed a small bleed, but Mercer's symptoms had been worse than that. Ward leaned closer to her. You really think there's more? Lena didn't answer right away. She watched the surgical field. His pupils were off before the scan changed. Ward crossed his arms. That can happen with concussion. Not like that. Ward studied her face for a second. Then he looked back at the OR screen. Pike, he called. The surgeon didn't look up. Yeah, Ward gestured toward Lena. She thinks the bleed's worse than it looks. Pike paused for half a second, then continued working. That wouldn't be the first time imaging missed something. Ward stepped closer to the table. You want to check deeper? Pike's voice stayed calm. I already am. The surgical light reflected off the exposed bone. Everything looked controlled. Textbook. But Lena's instincts didn't relax. She had learned the hard way that clean visuals didn't always mean clean reality. Pike spoke again. Suction. The instrument moved into place. Fluid cleared from the field. Ward watched the monitor. Pressure. The anesthesiologist responded. Climbing slightly. Ward frowned. How much? Up 10 points in the last minute. That wasn't what they wanted to hear. Pike noticed. That's faster than expected. Lena stepped closer to the IV pump. Her hands moved automatically. Adjust flow. Check line. Confirm rate. But her focus stayed on Mercer. The rhythm of the monitor had changed. Subtle, but real. Ward looked at Pike. You seeing anything? Pike adjusted the retractor. Not yet. Lena spoke quietly. It's there. Ward glanced at her. You're sure? She nodded once. Pike paused again. Then he shifted slightly. Let's widen exposure. The surgical team adjusted immediately. More space, more visibility. The room tightened. Even the small sounds seemed louder now. Metal instruments, soft suction, steady beeping. The anesthesiologist spoke again. Pressure rising again. Ward's jaw tightened. How fast? 15 points over baseline. That was no longer minor. Pike leaned in closer. All right. His tone stayed even. But the pace of his movements changed. Faster. More deliberate. Lena watched his hands. She knew that shift. It meant the situation had just moved from controlled to urgent. Ward stepped closer to the table. What are you thinking? Pike didn't look up. I think your nurse is right. Ward glanced at Lena. She didn't react. She just kept watching. Pike adjusted his angle again. Suction. The tool cleared the field again. Then Pike stopped for half a second. There. Ward leaned in. What Pike pointed with the tip of the instrument. Deeper bleed. Ward exhaled slowly. Damn. The clot wasn't where the scan had suggested. It was further in, partially hidden and spreading. Lena felt her shoulders drop just slightly. Not relief, just confirmation. She had seen this before. Too many times. Ward shook his head. That would have killed him. Pike nodded. Yeah. The anesthesiologist spoke again. Pressure's still climbing. Pike moved quickly now. Let's not give it time. His hands worked with precision. Controlled, focused, but faster than before. The room followed his rhythm. Everything tightened around the table. Ward watched the monitor. Heart rate climbing. Pressure unstable. He looked at Lena. You called this before anyone else. She didn't look at him. I've seen it before. Ward nodded slowly. Where places that didn't have CT scanners. Ward didn't ask anything else. He understood enough. Mercer's condition shifted again. The monitor spiked. The anesthesiologist spoke sharply. We're losing stability. Pike didn't look up. I see it. His voice stayed calm, but his hands moved faster. Retractor. Here. Suction. Got it. Lena adjusted the IV again. More fluid. The nurse beside her nodded and increased the flow. Ward stepped closer to the anesthesiologist. What's his pressure now? Dropping. Ward looked back at Pike. We're running out of room here. Pike's voice stayed steady. I know. The clot finally came into full view. Dark, pressing, dangerous. Pike worked carefully. One wrong move here could make things worse. Ward held his breath without realizing it. Lena watched every second. She had seen moments like this before. Moments where everything came down to one decision. One movement. 1 second. Pike adjusted his grip. All right. The room went even quieter, if that was possible. Then he removed the clot. Clean, precise, controlled. The effect was immediate. The monitor changed. Heart rate stabilized. Pressure stopped dropping. The anesthesiologist looked at the screen. Pressure leveling. Ward exhaled. There it is. Lena didn't move. She kept watching, waiting, because she knew better than to relax too early. Pike continued working. Let's clean the area. The suction cleared the remaining blood. The surgical field looked better now. But Pike didn't slow down. He checked again and again. making sure nothing was left behind. Ward glanced at Lena. "You were right." She didn't respond. Not because she didn't hear him, but because she was still watching Mercer, still making sure. The monitor continued its steady rhythm, the kind of rhythm everyone in the room wanted to hear. But Lena's eyes narrowed slightly, just for a moment, because something still didn't feel completely right. Not wrong, just not finished. Lena kept watching the monitor even after Pike removed the clot. The numbers had stabilized, heart rate steady, blood pressure holding. The kind of improvement everyone in the room wanted to see. But she didn't step away. She had learned not to trust the first sign of improvement. Pike continued working carefully. "Let's irrigate." The surgical assistant followed immediately. Fluid washed over the exposed area. Clearing what was left behind, Ward leaned toward the anesthesiologist. "Vitals stable for now." Ward nodded. "That's a good sign?" Pike didn't slow down. He checked deeper again, then once more, making sure there wasn't another hidden bleed waiting to cause problems. Lena finally stepped back half a step. Not relaxed, just shifting position. Her eyes moved from the monitor to Mercer's face. Even under sedation, the tension in his features had eased. That pressure he described earlier, it wasn't crushing him anymore. Ward noticed her posture change. "You still think something's off?" Lena shook her head slightly. "No." Ward exhaled. "Good." Across the room, the surgical rhythm settled. The urgency had passed. But no one in that room treated it like a victory. Not yet. Mercer's body was still recovering, still fragile, still one step away from going the other direction. Ward leaned against the counter. "You said his symptoms were worse than the scan." Lena nodded. "They were." Ward crossed his arms. "Then what caused that?" Lena didn't answer immediately. She watched Pike finish cleaning the area. Then she said quietly, "Blast pressure." Ward tilted his head. "You mean from the explosion, yeah." Ward nodded slowly. That would explain the delayed reaction. Lena didn't look at him. Not always delayed. Ward studied her face. "You've seen it hit faster." She nodded. Ward didn't ask where. He already knew. Pike spoke again. "Let's start closing." The surgical team shifted positions. Everything moved into the final phase, but Lena's attention drifted again. Not away from Mercer, just deeper into what had led him here. Salgado was still outside the OR, waiting, watching, carrying something heavier than most people in that hospital understood. Ward broke the silence. "That training accident." Lena looked at him. "What about it?" Ward leaned back. "Something about it doesn't sit right." Lena said nothing. Ward continued. "2 injuries from a ricochet round. Blast pressure. 1 Marine dead." He shook his head. "That's a bad chain of events." Lena's voice stayed even. "Training accidents usually are." Ward nodded. "Yeah, but this one feels messy." Lena glanced toward the door, then back at Mercer. "What are you getting at?" Ward shrugged. "I've seen plenty of trauma cases." He paused. "But most of them make sense." Lena's tone stayed neutral. "And this one doesn't?" Ward thought for a second. "No." It does. He looked at the monitor again. I just don't like how many things had to go wrong at once. Lena didn't respond, because she understood exactly what he meant. Multiple failures, stacked together. That's how bad situations happen. That's how people end up on operating tables. Pike finished securing the surgical site. Almost done. The anesthesiologist adjusted the settings. Vitals holding steady. Ward nodded. That's what we want. Lena stepped closer again. She watched Mercer's chest rise and fall. Slow. Controlled. Alive. Ward glanced at her. You two were close. Lena didn't answer right away. Same unit, she said finally. Ward raised an eyebrow. That's not what I asked. Lena kept her eyes on Mercer. It's enough. Ward accepted that. He didn't push further. Because some answers don't come out in operating rooms. They come out later. Or not at all. Pike stepped back slightly. All right. He looked around the room. We're in good shape. Ward exhaled quietly. Nice work. Pike nodded once. Team effort. The tension in the room eased. Just slightly. Not gone. Just lighter. Lena checked the IV one more time. Everything looked right. Everything looked stable. But her mind went back to something Mercer had said earlier. Tate was setting the line. She had heard that part clearly. Ward noticed her expression. What? She looked at him. He said Tate was setting the charge. Ward nodded. Yeah. She tilted her head slightly. That doesn't line up. Ward frowned. How? Charges don't go off early like that unless something's wrong. Ward crossed his arms. Equipment failure. Maybe. She shook her head slightly. But Marines check that gear constantly. Ward nodded slowly. Then what are you thinking Lena didn't answer right away? She looked at Mercer again. At the calm. At the silence. At the fact that he was still here. Then she spoke quietly. I think something went wrong before the explosion. Ward studied her for a moment. You mean human error? Lena didn't say yes. But she didn't say no. Ward sighed. That's going to be a fun report. Lena didn't respond. Because reports didn't matter to her right now. What mattered was the man on that table. Still breathing. Still alive. Because of decisions made in seconds. Because of things noticed that almost weren't. Because someone had been paying attention. Pike removed his gloves. We'll move him to ICU once he's stable enough. Ward nodded. Good plan. The anesthesiologist began adjusting the sedation levels, preparing Mercer for transfer. Lena stayed where she was, watching, always watching, because she had learned something a long time ago. You don't assume the danger is over, not until the patient walks out of the hospital, and sometimes not even then. The monitor continued its steady rhythm, but Lena's eyes shifted one more time. Back to Mercer's face. Back to the smallest details. Because that was the difference. Between thinking someone was safe and knowing they actually were. Lena adjusted the IV flow one more time as the surgical team began preparing Mercer for transport. The pace in the room had slowed. Not relaxed, just controlled. The kind of quiet that comes after something almost went very wrong. Dr. Pike stepped away from the table, pulling off his gloves. He's stable, he said. Dr. Ward nodded. Better than he was an hour ago. The anesthesiologist checked the monitor again. Vitals are holding. We can move him to ICU. Ward glanced at Lena. You coming down with him? Lena looked at Mercer, then back at the monitor. Yeah. The transport team rolled the ICU bed into position. The switch was smooth. Careful. Practiced. Mercer didn't move. Didn't react. Just steady breathing under sedation. As they secured him, Pike stepped beside Ward. That bleed would have kept going. Ward nodded. I know. Pike looked toward Lena. She caught it early. Ward followed his gaze. Yeah. Pike folded his arms. You don't see that often. Ward gave a small, quiet laugh. No, you don't. The team began moving Mercer out of the OR. The hallway lights felt dimmer after the brightness of surgery. The wheels rolled steadily toward ICU. Ward walked alongside Lena. You've done that before. It wasn't a question. Lena kept her eyes on the bed. Yes. Ward nodded slowly. I figured. They reached the ICU doors. A nurse inside opened them. Room 5 is ready. The transfer took less than a minute. New monitors, new lines, new staff, but the same patient. Still fighting, still holding on. The ICU nurse checked the chart. Subdural evacuation, Ward nodded. Caught early. The nurse looked at Lena. You were in the OR, yes. The nurse gave a small nod. Good call. Lena didn't respond. She stepped back as the ICU team took over. Ward stayed beside her, watching, thinking, then he spoke. You saved him. Lena shook her head slightly. No, Ward frowned. You caught the bleed before it got worse. That's part of the job. Ward crossed his arms. That's not just part of the job. Lena looked at him. It is if you've seen it before. Ward held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Fair. Across the room, the ICU nurse adjusted the monitor. Vitals still stable. Ward exhaled quietly. Good. Salgado stepped into the ICU a few seconds later. He had been waiting outside, watching everything from a distance. Now he moved closer to the bed. Mercer lay still, breathing slow, alive. Salgado looked at Lena. You pulled him through. Lena shook her head again. He's not through yet. Salgado nodded. Still. He glanced at Mercer, then back at Lena. I heard what you said to him earlier. Lena didn't respond. You told him he didn't freeze. Lena's expression stayed neutral. He didn't. Salgado studied her. You're sure? Yes. Salgado looked down at Mercer. He's been carrying that for a while. Lena nodded slightly. Most of them do. Ward listened quietly. He didn't interrupt, because he was starting to understand something. This wasn't just a medical case. It was something else layered underneath. Something older. Something heavier. Salgado looked back at Lena. Tate wouldn't blame him. Lena didn't answer right away. Then she said quietly, I know. Salgado nodded once, then stepped back, giving space. Ward glanced at Lena again. You knew about that, yes. Ward folded his arms. And you didn't say anything earlier. It wasn't the priority. Ward let out a breath. No, I guess it wasn't. The ICU monitor beeped steadily. Consistent, reliable. The kind of sound that meant things were going right. For now. Ward looked at the chart again. Then back at Lena. You ever think about doing more than this? Lena raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Ward gestured toward the room. You've got experience most people here don't. Lena didn't respond. Ward continued. I'm serious. Advanced training. Clinical track. Something. Lena shook her head slightly. I'm fine where I am. Ward didn't look convinced. You could be running a trauma unit. Lena glanced at Mercer, then back at Ward. I don't need that. Ward studied her face. Why not? Lena's voice stayed calm. Because titles don't change outcomes. Ward paused, then nodded slowly. Fair point. Across the room, the ICU nurse adjusted Mercer's blanket. He's going to need observation overnight. Ward nodded. Of course. The nurse looked at Lena. You want to stay? Lena shook her head. I'll check on him later. The nurse smiled slightly. Sounds good. Ward stepped back toward the door. Come on. You've been on shift all night. Lena didn't move right away. She looked at Mercer one more time, then followed Ward out into the hallway. The ICU doors closed behind them. The corridor felt quieter, less intense. Ward leaned against the wall. You ever get used to that? Lena shook her head. No. Ward nodded. Yeah, me neither. He pushed off the wall. Get some rest. Lena gave a small nod. You too. Ward started down the hallway, then stopped. One more thing. Lena looked at him. That call sign. Atlas. Ward tilted his head. You knew that from years ago. Yes. Ward studied her. You remember all of them. Lena thought for a second. Most. Ward gave a small, thoughtful nod. Must be a heavy list. Lena didn't answer. Because it was. Ward turned and walked away. Lena stood there for a moment, alone in the hallway. Then she looked back toward the ICU doors, just for a second. Then she turned and headed toward the exit. Her shift was over. But the night didn't feel finished. Lena pushed through the hospital exit doors as the first light of morning stretched across the parking lot. The air outside felt colder than it should, or maybe she just noticed it more after a night like that. Behind her, Redwood Valley Regional was already shifting into day mode. More staff arriving, more patients coming in. Another long day starting. She walked toward her car without rushing. No adrenaline left. Just that quiet feeling that settles in after everything slows down. Her hands still felt like they were working, even though they weren't. Muscle memory didn't shut off right away. She reached her car, unlocked it, and sat behind the wheel. For a moment, she didn't start the engine. She just sat there, listening. The faint hum of traffic, a distant siren somewhere down the road. Normal sounds. But her mind didn't stay in the parking lot. It drifted. Back to the OR. Back to the monitor. Back to the moment Pike found the deeper bleed. One detail off. One instinct followed. That was the difference. She leaned back in the seat, closed her eyes for a second, then opened them again. No point sitting here too long. She started the engine. The radio came on automatically. Some morning show talking about traffic delays. She turned it off. Silence felt better. She pulled out of the parking space and drove toward the main road. A few minutes later, she passed the turnoff toward Camp Pendleton. The gates were already open. A line of vehicles moved steadily through. Marines heading in. Marines heading out. Same routine. Different day. She slowed slightly as she passed. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Just enough to look. Uniforms, boots, posture, all familiar. None of it felt distant. It never really did. She kept driving. At a red light she stopped. Her fingers tapped lightly against the steering wheel. Without thinking, she checked the time. Shift over, technically. But that didn't mean much. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She glanced at it. A message from the hospital system. Patient status update. Mercer Daniel. Stable. She stared at the screen for a second, then set the phone down. Good. That was all that mattered. The light turned green. She drove on. A few blocks later, she pulled into a small gas station. Not because she needed gas, just habit. She parked and stepped out. The morning air felt different now, clearer, less heavy. She walked inside, grabbed a bottle of water, and paid without saying much. The cashier gave her a polite nod. Long night, yeah. He smiled. Those are the worst. She didn't correct him, just nodded and walked back out. She leaned against her car for a moment, taking a sip of water. Across the street, a Marine in workout gear jogged past. Headphones in. Focused. Alive. Normal. Lena watched him disappear down the sidewalk. Then she got back into her car. As she pulled out of the lot, her mind went back again. Not to the OR this time. Further back. Dust, heat, noise. That road near coast. 6 Marines down. Not enough time. Not enough hands. Not enough anything. She had made the calls she had to make. Saved who she could. Lost who she couldn't. That part never really leaves. Not completely. But something felt different now. Not lighter. Just clearer. Back then everything happened at once. No time to think. Now there was time. Time to see things. Time to catch details. Time to act before it was too late. She turned onto the highway. Traffic picked up. Morning commuters. Normal life. She blended into it without standing out. Just another car. Just another person heading home. But the difference was in what she carried with her. Not visibly. Not in a way anyone else could see. But it was there. In the way she noticed things. In the way she reacted. In the way she didn't freeze when everyone else stepped back. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from Dr. Ward. You should seriously think about that clinical track. She read it. Didn't reply. Set the phone down again. He meant well. But he didn't get it. Not fully. This wasn't about moving up, or titles, or recognition. It never had been. She drove a little further, then took the exit toward her apartment, a quiet complex a few miles from the hospital. Nothing special, just a place to sleep. She parked and turned off the engine. For a moment she sat there again, same as before. But this time it felt different. Less weight, more direction. She stepped out and walked toward her door. As she unlocked it, she paused. Not because she forgot something, but because her mind replayed one moment from earlier. Mercer's voice. Did I freeze? And her answer. No. She had meant that, because she knew what freezing looked like. And Mercer hadn't done that. He had kept moving, even after the blast, even after the chaos, even after everything went wrong. She stepped inside her apartment, set her keys on the counter, kicked off her shoes. The place was quiet, still, exactly how she left it. She walked to the sink and washed her hands, slow, methodical, the way she always did after a shift. As the water ran, she stared at her reflection in the mirror above the sink. Same face, same tired eyes, but something else underneath, something steady. She dried her hands and turned off the light. The room went dim. She moved toward the bedroom, already thinking about sleep. But before she reached it, her phone buzzed one more time. She picked it up. Another hospital alert. Incoming trauma mail, mid-20s, possible internal injuries. She stood there for a second, reading it. Then she set the phone down. Didn't grab her keys. Didn't rush out. Just stood there. Because she knew something simple. She didn't need to run back right now. There were other nurses on shift, other doctors, other people doing the same job. But the thought stayed in the back of her mind anyway, because it always did. Somewhere out there, someone needed help, and sooner or later she would be the one standing closest. Not because she had to, but because she knew how. She walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Quiet. Still. For a few seconds she just sat there. Then she lay back and closed her eyes. And for the first time that night, everything finally slowed down. Not stopped. Just slowed. Because the truth was simple. She had left the battlefield. But the battlefield hadn't left her. And in a place like that hospital, it didn't have to. Lena didn't think of herself as a hero. Not in the hospital. Not back then. Not now. She just did what needed to be done. And that's the part most people don't see in stories like this. In hospitals, it's not always the loudest voice or the highest title that saves a life. Sometimes it's the nurse who notices something small, the doctor who decides to double-check, the one person in the room who doesn't step back when things get messy. That's what real doctors' and nurses' stories look like. No spotlight, no dramatic speeches, just quiet decisions that change everything. That night, one Marine lived because someone paid attention when others almost moved on. Because one female military nurse trusted her experience more than the first answer on a screen. And maybe that's the lesson. In a hospital, details matter. In life, instincts matter. And sometimes the difference between life and death is just one person choosing to look closer. If you enjoy real hospital stories like this, stories about doctors, nurses, and the moments that don't make headlines, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Because there are many more stories like this, and some of them might stay with you longer than you expect.